A black businesswoman, impeccably dressed and poised, arrived at a private jet terminal to board her flight. She was a CEO, a self-made success ready for an important meeting that would shape the future of her company. But what should have been a routine moment of triumph turned into a confrontation she'd never forget. A terminal staff member, fueled by unchecked biases, accused her of trespassing on the jet she owned, questioning her right to be there. What happened next? In just 5 minutes, the tables turned. With a single phone call and undeniable proof of her authority, the staff member was fired on the spot. The room was left in stunned silence, and the fallout sparked a conversation about the assumptions we carry and the biases we must confront. Stay with me, this is a story about resilience, power, and breaking down barriers. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if this story inspires you, don't forget to subscribe for more tales that challenge and empower. The private jet terminal was a haven for exclusivity. Its polished marble floors, soft leather chairs, and the faint hum of private jets waiting on the tarmac spoke of a world that prided itself on luxury, sophistication, and unspoken hierarchies. Nina Edwards stepped through the sliding glass doors, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She moved with a quiet confidence, her tailored navy slacks and crisp white blouse framing her as a woman who had long learned how to walk into rooms where she wasn't expected but always made her presence known. She felt the eyes on her immediately. It wasn't unusual. Black, impeccably dressed, and a woman. Nina knew she often stood out in spaces like this not for her elegance but for the unspoken questions her presence raised. It didn't matter that she had built her career from the ground up, or that her name was etched on ownership papers worth more than the entire terminal. To the staff stationed behind the glossy counter, she was an anomaly. The first look came from the receptionist, a young woman with hair pulled into a tight bun, her professional smile faltering for a brief moment as she took in Nina's presence. Then came the sidelong glances from a pair of ground crew members leaning against the desk. Their quiet conversation interrupted as they exchanged whispers about her arrival. "Can I help you, ma'am?" the receptionist asked, her voice polite but edged with something Nina had encountered too many times before: skepticism. "Yes," Nina said, her tone calm and steady. "I'm here for the Aurora jet on the East Tarmac." For a moment, the receptionist hesitated, her fingers poised over the keyboard. Then, as though something in Nina's poise unsettled her, she asked, "Do you have a reservation?" Nina's lips curved into a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I don't need one," she replied evenly. "It's my jet." The receptionist blinked, her composure cracking just enough for Nina to see the disbelief lurking beneath her professional mask. "Your jet?" she repeated, the words slow, as though they didn't make sense. "Yes," Nina said again, her patience unwavering. "The Aurora jet. It's mine." The receptionist didn't respond immediately. Her gaze flickered over Nina once more, and Nina recognized it for what it was: a subtle inventory of her appearance. Her skin, her presence in this space. The unspoken assumption was clear: she didn't belong. Before the receptionist could respond, a gruff voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" Nina turned to see a man approaching, his fluorescent safety vest catching the light as he walked. His face, weathered from years of working on the tarmac, carried a permanent scowl that deepened as he looked her over. He didn't wait for an answer from the receptionist. "I'm Mike," he said, his tone brusque, "head of ground operations. Is there a problem here?" The receptionist faltered, glancing nervously between Mike and Nina. "She's, claiming the Aurora jet is hers." Mike's scowl darkened as he turned his full attention to Nina. His gaze was slow and deliberate, lingering on her designer handbag in understated elegance, as though searching for a crack in her facade. "That's a private jet," he said bluntly. "You can't just walk in here and claim it's yours." Nina met his gaze, her expression calm but firm. "I'm not claiming anything," she said. "It is mine." Mike scoffed, folding his arms across his chest. "Listen, lady, I don't know how you got in here, but this isn't some commercial airline where you can just sneak onto a flight. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have security escort you out." It was then that Nina felt the weight of the room shift. The whispers grew louder. Passengers in tailored suits and expensive dresses paused their conversations to glance in her direction. Staff members moved subtly closer, pretending to busy themselves while clearly eavesdropping. The judgment in their eyes was unmistakable. "She doesn't look like she belongs here." Someone muttered. "Maybe she's lost." Another added, not bothering to lower their voice. Nina straightened her posture, her chin lifting just slightly. She was used to this. It wasn't the first time her authority had been questioned, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. But this time, the stakes were different. This wasn't just about proving herself, it was about what her presence here represented. "Do you always treat your clients this way?" Nina asked, her voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. "You're not a client," Mike snapped. "You're trespassing." Before Nina could respond, a pair of security guards approached, their stances rigid with authority. One of them, a tall man with a clipboard, looked at her with a mix of caution and suspicion. "Ma'am," he said, his tone measured, "we're going to need you to step aside and provide some identification." Nina's gaze didn't waver. Instead, she reached into her handbag. But instead of producing an ID, she pulled out her phone. "I don't think that will be necessary," she said calmly, dialing a number with practiced ease. "What do you think you're doing?" Mike demanded, his irritation boiling over. Nina raised a finger to silence him as the call connected. Her voice softened slightly, but the steel in her words was unmistakable. "Jordan, I need you at the terminal. Bring the documents." The guards exchanged uncertain glances as Mike's scowl deepened. Nina ended the call and slipped the phone back into her bag, her expression unshaken. "I suggest you prepare yourself," she said, her voice carrying a quiet power. "This situation is about to change very quickly." The room seemed to hold its breath, every eye fixed on Nina. The murmur of voices faded, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. It was the kind of silence that only came before a storm. And Nina could feel it building. Outside, the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the tension. Through the glass doors, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the entrance, its tinted windows gleaming under the morning sun. The driver stepped out first, followed by a sharply dressed man carrying a leather folder. Jordan Hayes walked with the air of someone who didn't have to prove his authority, it simply followed him. As he entered the terminal, his gaze locked on Nina, and a subtle nod passed between them. "Miss Edwards," he said, his tone formal but warm. "Everything is prepared." "Good," Nina replied, her voice steady. She turned to Mike, her gaze piercing. "Now, let's clear up this misunderstanding." Mike's bravado faltered as Jordan stepped forward, the leather folder in his hand unmistakable. For the first time, there was a flicker of doubt in the room, a shift in the balance of power. Nina didn't need to say a word. Her presence, her resolve, and now her proof spoke louder than any argument she could make. And so, the battle lines were drawn not just between Nina and those who doubted her, but between the world as it was and the world as it should be. The black SUV idled just outside the terminal, its sleek exterior glinting in the sun. Jordan Hayes stepped out with precision, his tailored suit as sharp as his movements. He carried a leather folder in his hand, his expression unreadable. Behind the tinted windows, the faint outline of the driver remained visible, waiting for further instruction. Inside the terminal, the murmurs grew louder as passengers and staff strained to see what would happen next. Nina stood at the center of it all, her composure a deliberate shield against the rising tide of tension. She watched as Jordan approached, the sight of him steadying her resolve. This wasn't just about the confrontation anymore, it was about dismantling something deeper. Something ingrained in every whisper, every skeptical glance, every subtle dismissal she had faced since stepping through the doors. Mike, the head of ground operations, shifted uneasily as Jordan entered the terminal. The scowl that had been his mask of authority now wavered, a crack forming as doubt seeped in. He didn't look at Nina directly anymore, instead glancing at the two security guards who flanked him. The guards, stiff and silent, mirrored the discomfort that had begun to settle in the room. "Miss Edwards," Jordan said, his voice low but firm. He handed her the folder with a practiced motion, his gaze briefly meeting hers. "Everything is in order. Thank you, Jordan," Nina replied, her voice carrying an authority that cut through the murmurs. She turned her attention to Mike and the security guards, opening the folder to reveal its contents. "These are the ownership documents for the Aurora jet," she said, her tone measured but unyielding. "Signed, sealed, and notarized. I trust this will put an end to any further doubts." The weight of her words hung in the air, pressing down on the room like an invisible force. For a moment, no one moved. The receptionist, who had been watching with wide eyes, visibly paled as the reality of the situation began to sink in. One of the security guards stepped closer, his gaze flickering between the documents and Nina's unflinching expression. Mike's voice, when it finally came, was strained. This is highly irregular," he said, though the bravado that had defined his earlier tone was gone. "We're just following protocol. There are security concerns." "Security concerns?" Nina cut in, her words sharp. "What concerns, exactly? That I don't look the part? That my presence in this space doesn't fit your assumptions?" Mike opened his mouth, but no words came. His silence spoke volumes, and the room seemed to shrink around him. Jordan stepped forward then, his movements deliberate. "Miss Edwards is not just the owner of the jet," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "She is the CEO of Aurora Aviation. She built the very company you work for. And yet you treated her as if she were an intruder." A ripple of whispers spread through the terminal. Louder this time. Passengers exchanged glances, some embarrassed, others indignant. One man in a tailored suit shook his head, muttering under his breath, "Unbelievable." Nina took a step closer to Mike, her gaze unwavering. "Do you know what the most exhausting part of this is?" she asked, her voice soft but piercing. "It's not the blatant disrespect, though that's tiring enough. It's the constant need to prove myself in spaces where my presence alone should be proof enough. It's the unspoken assumptions that someone like me can't possibly belong, despite all the evidence to the contrary." Her words landed with a quiet finality, each one a stone dropped into the still water of the room's collective conscience. Mike's face flushed a deep red, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. The security guards, caught in the crossfire of authority and error, exchanged uneasy glances. Before anyone could respond, a sharp voice cut through the room. "Miss Edwards, I'd like to personally apologize." All eyes turned to the speaker, a middle-aged woman in a crisp blazer, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she approached. She extended a hand toward Nina, her expression contrite. "I'm Karen Stanton, the terminal manager. I was just informed of the situation, and I'm deeply sorry for how you've been treated." Nina regarded her for a moment, then shook her hand with a firm grip. "Apologies are appreciated," she said, her tone even, "but actions matter more. This isn't just about me. It's about ensuring that no one else is subjected to this kind of treatment." Karen nodded, her face tight with a mix of embarrassment and determination. "You're absolutely right. I'll see to it personally that corrective measures are taken." But before Karen could continue, a voice from the crowd interrupted. "Why does it always take this long for someone to do the right thing?" The question came from an older black man standing near the edge of the terminal. His arms crossed, his voice carried the weariness of experience, the kind that didn't need amplification to be heard. His words hung in the air, resonating in a way that silence could not. Karen glanced at him, then back at Nina, as if searching for a response. But Nina said nothing, letting the truth of his statement settle over the room. In that moment, Nina realized this wasn't just about correcting one incident. It was about addressing the deeper fault lines that ran beneath the surface of everyday interactions. It was about acknowledging the quiet indignities that so often went unnoticed but never unfelt. As Jordan stepped back, signaling to the staff to review the documents further, Nina turned toward the older man. She met his gaze and nodded a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken bond between them. He nodded back, his expression one of quiet respect. The terminal had grown quieter now, the tension replaced by a palpable sense of introspection. Passengers and staff alike seemed to move with a new awareness, their earlier certainty replaced by the humbling realization of how easily they had been complicit. Nina felt the shift, subtle but significant. It wasn't enough, not yet. But it was a start. And for her, that was reason enough to keep going. The private jet terminal should have been a quiet place of transition, a waypoint for executives, magnates, and dreamers with pockets deep enough to soar above the clouds. Yet as Nina Edwards walked away from the reception desk, the whispers and sideways glances followed her like a shadow. The echo of Mike's disdainful tone lingered in her mind, but she pushed it aside. Jordan's presence had begun to shift the balance, but she knew too well how long it could take for perceptions to truly change. She stepped toward the large glass windows overlooking the tarmac, the Aurora jet gleaming in the sun like a sentinel of her success. Despite its grandeur, She felt a pang of discomfort, a familiar unease that came not from the jet itself but from the walls it had forced her to scale just to claim her place as its owner. Behind her, the murmurs persisted, now peppered with quiet indignation. CEO or not, she heard someone mutter. She didn't have to make a scene. Another voice, softer but no less biting, replied, "It's always about playing the victim." Her fingers tightened around the strap of her handbag, the leather creaking softly under her grip. These moments, when people didn't know they were being overheard, revealed truths that no apology or corporate training could erase. Racism, Nina had come to understand, often didn't arrive with slurs or fists, it slipped in through quiet comments. Lowered expectations, and the constant need to prove that she deserved to exist in spaces like this. Jordan's voice cut through her thoughts. "Miss Edwards," he said, his tone steady, "we've confirmed the documents with the staff. They've acknowledged the error." She turned to him, her expression calm but tight. "Acknowledging the error isn't enough," she said softly. "If we let this go without consequences, it'll happen again." Before Jordan could respond, Karen Stanton, the terminal manager, reappeared. She moved with purpose, her demeanor contrite but hurried, as though trying to fix a mistake before it spiraled further. "Miss Edwards," Karen began, her voice clipped with nervous energy, "I've spoken with my staff, and we'll be implementing immediate training sessions to address the biases that led to this misunderstanding." Nina raised an eyebrow. "Training sessions," she echoed, her tone even but pointed. "And what about accountability?" Karen hesitated, her polished exterior cracking. "I understand your frustration, but, do you?" Nina interjected, her voice rising just enough to draw attention. "Do you understand what it's like to walk into a room and be seen as a trespasser instead of a client? To have your authority questioned not because of anything you've done, but because of what you look like?" Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her discomfort palpable. "I can assure you, Miss Edwards, this isn't about race. It's a misunderstanding, nothing more." Nina let out a soft, humorless laugh. "It's always a misunderstanding, isn't it? Until it happens again, and again, and again." The terminal grew quieter, the atmosphere thick with unease. Passengers glanced between Nina and Karen, their faces betraying a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Even Jordan, usually composed, shifted his weight slightly, his gaze flicking to the ground. Karen cleared her throat, clearly unprepared for the intensity of Nina's response. "I assure you, Miss Edwards, we take this very seriously. Mike's behavior will be addressed." "Addressed how?" Nina pressed. "Will he be reassigned, given a warning, or will he face real consequences for his actions?" Karen hesitated, and that hesitation spoke volumes. Nina felt a familiar pang of frustration. The system always found ways to protect its own, to excuse behavior that, in any other context, would be deemed unacceptable. Mike might face a slap on the wrist, a carefully worded reprimand, but the culture that enabled him would remain untouched. Nina stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper, though its intensity could have pierced stone. "Let me be clear. If Aurora Aviation's name is going to be associated with this terminal, there will be accountability, not just for Mike, but for everyone who stood by and let this happen." Karen's expression hardened, though she quickly masked it with a polite smile. "Of course, Miss Edwards," she said, "we'll handle it." But Nina wasn't convinced. She knew that tone, the one that promised action while quietly waiting for the storm to pass. As Karen walked away, Jordan stepped beside Nina. "You handled that well," he said, though there was a note of caution in his voice. "Did I?" Nina asked, her gaze fixed on the tarmac. "Because it feels like I'm still fighting the same battle I've been fighting my entire life." Jordan didn't respond immediately. He understood her frustration, though he knew better than to offer platitudes. Instead, he said, "If you want real change, it's going to take more than today." Nina nodded slowly, her shoulders straightening. He was right. Change didn't happen in a single confrontation. It was built brick by brick, challenge by challenge, until the foundation could no longer hold the weight of inequity. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw a text from her flight crew. "Ready for departure. Awaiting your arrival." She slipped the phone back into her bag and turned to Jordan. "Let's go," she said. "We've got a flight to catch." As they walked toward the jet, the murmurs followed her again, like ghosts that refused to be exorcised. She didn't turn around this time. She didn't need to. She knew those whispers would outlive the moment. Just as she knew she'd face them again in another terminal. Another boardroom. Another conversation where her presence alone would challenge the status quo. But as the staircase to the Aurora jet came into view, gleaming in the sunlight, Nina felt a spark of defiance rise within her. She had fought to claim her place in this world. And she would not yield it, not to Mike, not to Karen, and not to the whispers of a world still struggling to see her as she truly was. And so, she climbed the steps, one deliberate footfall after another, carrying with her the weight of every fight she'd ever won and every fight still to come. The cabin of the Aurora jet was a sanctuary of polished wood, plush leather, and quiet opulence. As Nina Edwards settled into her seat, the faint hum of the engines provided a steady rhythm beneath the weight of her thoughts. The tension of the terminal encounter still clung to her like a second skin. A reminder that success didn't shield her from the quiet wars waged in the shadows of daily life. She gazed out the window, watching as the ground crew bustled about below, their movements purposeful yet distant. Above the hum of the engines and the rustle of the flight attendant preparing pre-departure drinks. Her mind replayed the morning's events in fragments. Mike's scowl, Karen's hollow assurances, the whispers that followed her every step. Each piece was a reminder of how the barriers she faced didn't crumble with accomplishment, they simply reshaped themselves. Appearing in new and insidious ways. Jordan sat across from her, his tablet balanced on his knee. He broke the silence with a question that had been lingering between them since they boarded. "Do you think Karen will follow through?" Nina didn't look away from the window. "Do you?" she countered, her voice soft but edged with a challenge. Jordan exhaled, leaning back in his seat. "She'll do the bare minimum," he admitted, enough to make it seem like progress. But not enough to disrupt anything that might make her uncomfortable. "And that's the problem," Nina said, finally turning her gaze to him. "Comfort. Comfort is why nothing changes. People like Karen want the appearance of accountability. But they don't want the discomfort that real change demands." Jordan nodded, his silence in agreement. He knew she was right. He'd seen it before, the way systems protected themselves. Bending just enough to quiet dissent but never enough to truly break the cycle. The flight attendant approached with a tray, her posture professional and her expression unreadable. "Would you like anything to drink before takeoff, Miss Edwards?" she asked. Nina's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Just water, thank you." The attendant nodded and placed a glass on the tray table. As she walked away, Nina couldn't help but notice the subtle difference in her demeanor compared to earlier. Respectful, yes, but there was something else, a stiffness that spoke of someone who had heard the whispers. Someone who had drawn her own conclusions but was careful not to let them show. The thought lingered as the jet began its taxi to the runway. Nina leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes as the vibrations of the aircraft coursed through her. For a moment, she allowed herself to be carried by the rhythm of the engines. But her reprieve was short-lived. Her phone buzzed on the armrest. Breaking the quiet, she glanced at the screen. It was a message from one of her senior executives. "Heard about the terminal incident. Let's talk when you land." Nina frowned. The message was brief, but the tone was unmistakable, a mix of concern and caution. Even within her own company, she could feel the ripple effects of what had happened. The subtle tension that arose whenever issues of race entered a space meant to focus on business. Jordan noticed her expression. "What is it?" "Words spreading," she said, placing the phone face down on the table. "Everyone's got an opinion, and none of them will say it outright." Jordan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her, his brow furrowed. "Do you think they see this as a distraction?" he asked carefully. Nina's smile was bitter. "Of course they do. To them, it's an inconvenience, something that disrupts the narrative they want to project, a company that's progressive, forward-thinking, above the fray. But the truth?" She paused, her voice dropping. "The truth is, we're still fighting the same battles they want to believe don't exist anymore." The jet accelerated down the runway. And for a moment, the conversation was swallowed by the roar of takeoff. As the aircraft lifted into the sky, the world below shrank into a patchwork of colors and shapes, its complexities reduced to a distant blur. But Nina's thoughts remained grounded, tethered to the weight of what lay ahead. She knew that the battle she faced wasn't just external, it was internal. Too, it was in the quiet hesitations of her colleagues, in the way even well-meaning allies avoided the hard conversations, in the subtle pressures to be exceptional without ever drawing too much attention to why she had to be. The cabin leveled out, and the flight attendant returned with a menu. Nina waved it off, her appetite dulled by the weight of her thoughts. Instead, she pulled out her notebook and began to write, the pen gliding across the page in deliberate strokes. Jordan watched her for a moment before speaking. What's the plan? She didn't look up. We start by making it impossible for them to ignore the problem. She said, training sessions aren't enough. We need a full audit top to bottom. Policies, hiring practices, workplace culture, everything. Jordan raised an eyebrow. That's not going to sit well with some of the senior team. I'm not here to make them comfortable, Nina said, her tone sharper than she intended. She paused, exhaled, and softened her voice. I'm here to make this company better. And if that means making some people uncomfortable, so be it. Jordan nodded, his expression thoughtful. You're right, he said after a moment. But you know as well as I do, this won't be the last fight. Nina closed her notebook and met his gaze. It never is, she said simply. As the jet soared above the clouds, Nina felt the familiar mix of exhaustion and determination settle in her chest. She had climbed too many mountains, crossed too many barriers, to let this moment pass without action. But she also knew that for every step forward, there would be resistance. For every victory, there would be those who questioned whether the fight was worth it. And for every change, there would be whispers, always whispers, reminding her that the world she lived in wasn't ready for the one she was trying to build. She leaned back in her seat, her eyes on the horizon. The sky was endless, its vastness both daunting and full of promise. And as the Aurora jet carried her toward her next destination, Nina made a silent vow: she would keep fighting. Not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved a place in a world that still refused to see them. The Aurora jet cruised at 35,000 feet. Its engines a steady hum against the silence of the cabin. The vast expanse of sky stretched endlessly beyond the windows. A tableau of soft blues and whites that might have inspired calm in another moment. But for Nina Edwards, peace felt like a faraway concept. Sitting upright in her seat, she scrolled through emails on her tablet, her mind already bracing for the next challenge. She knew what awaited her upon landing: a meeting with the senior executive team. A group of well-dressed, well-spoken people who would smile politely while sidestepping the real issue. They would couch their resistance in terms like brand perception and maintaining focus on growth. As if acknowledging racism was somehow incompatible with running a profitable business. Jordan sat across from her, his own focus divided between his notes and the occasional glance at Nina. He could tell from the tension in her jaw that her thoughts were far from the serene clouds outside. You're thinking about the meeting, he said, breaking the silence. Nina didn't look up. I'm thinking about how predictable it'll be, she replied. They'll agree with everything I say until it requires them to act. Then it'll be all about timing and optics. Jordan nodded, his expression grim. They'll frame it as concern for the company's reputation. And what they really mean, Nina added, is concern for their comfort. They don't want to explain to their friends at the club why Aurora Aviation is suddenly talking about systemic bias. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Anger, while justified, wouldn't win this battle. She had learned that long ago. Still, the weight of fighting these quiet wars wore heavy. No matter how well she carried it. The flight attendant approached, her presence tentative. Miss Edwards, would you like anything? She asked, her tone polite but cautious. Nina shook her head. I'm fine, thank you. The attendant nodded and retreated. But Nina caught the subtle hesitation in her movements. It was the same hesitation she'd seen in the terminal staff, in Karen Stanton, and in countless others before them. A moment's pause, a flicker of doubt, as if to ask, is she really who she says she is? It was a question Nina had spent her entire life answering. As the jet began its descent, Nina closed her tablet and turned to Jordan. I want to frame the meeting differently, she said. No more dancing around the issue. We're going to talk about what this really is: power, control, and the fear of losing both. Jordan raised an eyebrow. You think they're ready for that? They don't have to be ready, Nina said firmly. They just have to listen. The conference room at Aurora Aviation's headquarters was as polished and imposing as the brand it represented. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city. While sleek, Modern furniture filled the space with an air of understated wealth. The senior team was already assembled when Nina entered, their faces arranged into carefully neutral expressions. Miss Edwards, Richard Caldwell, the COO, greeted her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. We've been discussing the incident at the terminal. I must say, it's unfortunate how things escalated. Nina took her seat at the head of the table, her gaze steady as she surveyed the room. Unfortunate is one word for it, she said. Another word might be revealing. Richard's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. Of course, we take these matters seriously. Karen Stanton has assured us that she's implementing measures to ensure this doesn't happen again. And what measures are those? Nina asked, her tone deceptively calm. A few training sessions? A memo reminding staff to be polite? The room grew quiet. Nina's words hung in the air, challenging the veneer of professionalism that masked the deeper issue. Richard cleared his throat. We believe in addressing bias where it exists, but we also need to be mindful of how we approach these topics. It's important not to alienate our staff or customers. Nina leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. Alienate who? Richard? The people who assume I'm trespassing on my own jet? The ones who see discussions about racism as a personal attack instead of an opportunity to grow? Richard's face reddened, and he glanced down at his notes. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant, Nina said, her voice rising just enough to command the room. And that's the problem. We're so afraid of discomfort that we allow bias to thrive unchecked. We hide behind words like unfortunate and mindful while ignoring the harm being done every day. The tension in the room was palpable. Some executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others avoided Nina's gaze altogether. But she wasn't finished. This isn't just about one incident, she continued. It's about a culture that lets people like Mike, people who think they can decide who belongs and who doesn't, operate without consequence. It's about the silent complicity of everyone who looks the other way because it's easier than addressing the truth. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, one of the newer executives, a woman named Angela, broke the silence. You're right, she said quietly. I've seen it, too. The comments, the assumptions. It's not just the terminal staff. It's here, in this room, in this company. Her words were a crack in the facade. And Nina seized the moment. Thank you, Angela, she said. Acknowledging the problem is the first step. Now we need to act. What are you proposing? Richard asked, his tone wary. An audit, Nina said, of every department, every policy, every practice. We're going to root out the biases that have been allowed to fester. And we're going to rebuild a culture that reflects the values we claim to stand for. Richard frowned. That's a massive undertaking. It could be disruptive. Disruption is exactly what we need, Nina said, because the alternative is staying comfortable while the problem gets worse. The meeting ended with a mix of resistance and reluctant agreement. As the executives filed out, Nina stayed behind, her thoughts heavy. Jordan lingered by her side, his expression unreadable. You pushed them hard, he said after a moment. I had to, Nina replied. If they're uncomfortable, maybe they'll finally understand what it feels like to live with this every day. Jordan nodded, his respect for her clear. You think they'll follow through? They don't have a choice, Nina said. Not if I have anything to say about it. She turned to the window, watching as the city stretched out before her. The challenges ahead felt as vast and daunting as the skyline. But Nina knew she couldn't stop now. The fight wasn't just for her, it was for everyone who had been silenced, dismissed, or overlooked. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in a warm, golden glow, Nina felt a renewed sense of purpose. Change wouldn't come easily, but it would come. She would make sure of it. The boardroom echoed with the fading hum of voices, but the silence left in its wake felt louder. Nina Edwards stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawling beneath her like a restless tide. The meeting had ended moments ago, but its residue clung to her, a mix of tension, frustration, and the faintest flicker of hope. She glanced at her reflection in the glass. Her composed exterior belied the battle raging within, the weight of the day pressing against her shoulders like the weight of history itself. Behind her, Jordan Hayes closed his notebook and set it on the table. They'll push back, he said quietly, breaking the stillness. Nina turned to him, her expression calm but her voice tinged with determination. Let them. The resistance came sooner than expected. That afternoon, As emails pinged into her inbox and calls began to roll in, Nina saw the familiar pattern unfold. Objections wrapped in professional language. Concerns about costs and efficiency. Questions about whether such sweeping changes were necessary. But beneath the surface, the real message was clear. Why are you making this about race? It was a question Nina had encountered all her life. It arrived not as an inquiry but as an accusation, an attempt to shift the burden of accountability. And every time, it carried the same unspoken implication: if you just stop talking about it, the problem would go away. By evening, the pushback had crystallized into a more direct confrontation. Richard Caldwell, the COO, requested a private meeting. His tone over the phone was calm, almost conciliatory, but Nina knew better than to take it at face value. In her office, with its panoramic view of the skyline, she waited as Richard arrived, his footsteps measured and deliberate. He entered with a practiced smile, the kind that said he was here to smooth things over without actually addressing the issue. "Miss Edwards," he began, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I wanted to speak with you about the audit proposal." Nina leaned back in her chair, her fingers interlaced on the desk. "Go on." Richard adjusted his tie, his movements deliberate. "I think we all agree that addressing bias is important. But we need to consider the potential impact this could have on morale. An audit of this scale could make people feel scrutinized, even targeted." "Good," Nina said evenly. "Maybe they should feel scrutinized. If they're uncomfortable, it means we're getting somewhere." Richard's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. "I understand your perspective, but there's a balance to be struck here. We don't want to alienate our employees." Nina's gaze hardened. "Alienate who, Richard? The employees who already feel overlooked and dismissed? Or the ones who've benefited from those very biases we're trying to address?" He hesitated, his polished facade cracking slightly. "This isn't about sides," he said. "It's about maintaining harmony within the company." "Harmony," Nina repeated, the words sharp in her mouth. "Harmony is what people call it when nothing changes. It's the quiet agreement to pretend everything is fine while the same systems keep hurting the same people." Richard shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "You have to admit, though, this could become a PR issue. If we're not careful, it might look like we're overcorrecting." Nina leaned forward, her voice low but cutting. "Overcorrecting? We're not even close to correcting. You're worried about how it looks. Richard, I'm worried about how it is." The room fell silent, the air thick with the tension between them. Richard looked away first, his gaze dropping to the corner of her desk. "I just think we need to be careful," he muttered. "And I think we need to be bold." Nina countered, "If you're not ready to stand for something real, then maybe you should ask yourself why you're in this room." The confrontation with Richard set the tone for the week. Resistance came from all sides: executives concerned about investor confidence, managers worried about disrupting workflow, even whispers among the rank-and-file staff about whether the CEO's focus on bias was a distraction from real business. Nina heard it all, and every comment, every objection, carried the same unspoken truth. Change scared them. It wasn't just about the policies or the audit. It was about what the audit represented: a challenge to the status quo. A disruption of the unspoken agreements that had allowed some to thrive while others were left to fight for scraps. By the end of the week, Nina found herself in the terminal lounge, waiting for a flight to another meeting. The lounge, with its sleek design and muted colors, was filled with the quiet hum of business travelers speaking in low tones. As she sipped her coffee, she noticed a woman across the room watching her. She was older, with silver hair and a face lined by years of experience. The woman approached, her movements deliberate but unhurried. "Miss Edwards?" she said, her voice warm but firm. "I've read about you. It's good to see someone like you in charge." Nina smiled faintly, though the compliment carried its own weight. "Thank you." The woman hesitated, as if debating whether to continue. Finally, she said, "I hope you don't take this the wrong way. But, you've got a fight ahead of you. They're not going to make it easy." Nina set her coffee down, her gaze meeting the woman's. "They never do." The woman nodded, her expression thoughtful. "But it's worth it, even when it feels like you're alone." For the first time that week, Nina felt the faintest flicker of reassurance. "I know," she said, "and I'm not planning to stop." The woman smiled, a quiet understanding passing between them. "Good," she said, "because we need you." As Nina boarded her flight that evening, Her mind was clearer. The resistance she faced wasn't new. It was the same resistance that had met every movement for progress. Every call for justice. It was the inertia of a world that preferred comfort to confrontation. Silence to accountability. But Nina had never been one to let the world dictate her path. She had climbed too many mountains. Crossed too many barriers. To stop now. Above the clouds. As the jet cruised through the night sky, Nina allowed herself a moment of stillness. The challenges ahead were daunting. But they weren't insurmountable. And as she looked out at the stars, she felt a renewed determination. The fight wasn't just for her. It was for the countless others who came before her. And for the ones who would come after. And no amount of resistance would keep her from seeing it through. The sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Aurora Aviation headquarters was warm and golden. But it offered no comfort to Nina Edwards. She stood at the center of the conference room, her hands resting lightly on the back of a chair. Around the table sat her senior executives, their faces a mix of apprehension and guarded neutrality. The tension in the room was thick, an invisible thread tying each person to the unspoken resistance Nina had felt growing stronger by the day. This was not the first time Nina had stood at a crossroads. Every battle she had fought had brought her here to this moment. This room, this reckoning. But even as the stakes grew higher, she felt the same quiet fire that had carried her through every challenge before. "I've reviewed the feedback from the last meeting," Nina began, her voice calm but unwavering. "And I understand the concerns. But let me be clear. The audit is not up for debate." Her words landed with the weight of a gavel. And the reaction was immediate. Richard Caldwell, the COO, shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. Across the table, Angela, the newest member of the team, straightened her posture, her expression resolute but cautious. The others remained silent, their discomfort palpable. "Nina," Richard said, his tone carefully measured, "no one is questioning the importance of addressing bias. But the scope of this audit is unprecedented. We're already hearing whispers from staff who feel like they're being targeted." "Targeted?" Nina repeated, her tone sharper now. "Or held accountable?" Richard flinched but recovered quickly. "You know how sensitive these issues can be. People are worried about being unfairly judged. About their intentions being misunderstood." Nina leaned forward, her hands pressing against the cool surface of the table. "Intentions don't matter as much as impact," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "People don't experience intentions. They experience the consequences of actions, of biases left unchecked, of systems designed to exclude." The room fell silent, the tension growing heavier. For a moment, Nina thought she saw something shift in Richard's expression, not understanding exactly, but the faintest hint of uncertainty. It was enough to press forward. "This isn't just about fixing what's broken," she continued. "It's about setting a standard. Aurora Aviation claims to stand for excellence, innovation, and inclusion. If we don't live up to those values in every corner of this company, then they're just words on paper." The meeting ended without resolution. But Nina had expected that. Change, she knew, was rarely born from a single conversation. It was forged in the relentless push against resistance. In the quiet determination to keep going when every step felt like a battle. Back in her office, Nina stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the city below. The familiar ache of exhaustion tugged at her, but she pushed it aside. There was still work to be done. "Miss Edwards," Jordan said, stepping into the room, "there's something you should see." He handed her a tablet, the screen displaying a series of emails from mid-level staff. The messages varied in tone, some were supportive, others skeptical, but all shared a common thread. The audit was stirring something deeper than just professional concerns. It was forcing people to confront truths they had long ignored. "This one stood out," Jordan said, tapping on a message from Claire, a young employee who had spoken up during the initial training session. Nina scanned the email, her eyes lingering on a line that felt like a spark in the darkness. "For the first time, I feel like someone is willing to listen. I'm scared, but I'm also hopeful. Please don't stop." Nina's grip on the tablet tightened. "This is why we're doing it," she said softly. "For people like Claire. For everyone who's been scared to speak because they thought no one would hear them." Jordan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's starting to resonate, but you know that means the resistance will grow stronger." "It always does," Nina said. "That's how change works." The resistance came to a head 2 days later. in the form of a carefully worded letter signed by several department heads. The letter expressed concerns about the audit's potential to disrupt workplace harmony, and suggested alternative approaches that would be less invasive. It was polite, professional, and deeply infuriating. "They're trying to delay," Nina said, pacing her office as she read the letter aloud to Jordan. "This isn't about alternatives. It's about maintaining the status quo." Jordan leaned against the desk, his arms crossed. "So what's the next move?" Nina stopped pacing, her gaze sharp. "We call their bluff." At the next executive meeting, Nina brought the letter to the table. She read it aloud, her tone steady but deliberate, letting the words hang in the air before addressing the group. "This letter raises concerns about disruption," she said, "but let's be honest, what you're really concerned about is accountability. You're worried about what this audit might uncover, about the conversations it will force us to have." She looked around the table, her gaze meeting each executive's in turn. "But let me remind you, discomfort is not the enemy. Inaction is. And if we let our fear of disruption stop us from doing what's right, then we've already failed." Angela was the first to speak. "I support the audit," she said, her voice clear and firm. "It's not easy, but it's necessary. We can't build a better company if we're not willing to face the hard truths." Her words sparked something in the room. One by one, others began to voice their agreement, not all, but enough to shift the momentum. Even Richard, though hesitant, eventually conceded. That evening, as Nina left the office, she felt a strange mix of exhaustion and hope. The battle was far from over, but the tide was beginning to turn. The quiet resistance that had shadowed her steps was still there, but so was something else, something stronger. As she stepped into the cool night air, she thought of Claire's email, of Angela's courage, of the countless others who were watching, waiting, hoping. They were why she fought. They were why she wouldn't stop. Looking up at the stars scattered across the night sky, Nina felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was long, but she was ready. She always had been. The morning sunlight poured through the glass facade of Aurora Aviation's headquarters, illuminating the atrium in a golden glow. For a fleeting moment, Nina Edwards paused in the hallway, letting the warmth of the sun touch her face. The day ahead was monumental, not because it marked the conclusion of the audit, but because it demanded the courage to confront its findings. Her assistant, Jordan Hayes, approached with his usual calm efficiency, holding a slim folder in his hands. "The report is ready," he said, his voice steady but his expression grave. "It's thorough." Nina nodded, taking the folder from him. "Let's see how thorough." Inside her office, the report lay open on her desk. Each page detailed incidents, policies, and behaviors that painted a clear picture of systemic bias woven deeply into the fabric of Aurora Aviation. Hiring practices that favored certain demographics, promotion patterns that left women and people of color overlooked, a culture of subtle exclusion, where microaggressions went unaddressed and assumptions about who belonged were rarely challenged. Nina read each line with a mounting sense of resolve. None of it surprised her, but seeing it laid bare, stark and undeniable, was a reminder of just how much work lay ahead. Jordan spoke first. "It's bad," he said plainly, "but it's also actionable." Nina's eyes didn't leave the report. "Actionable doesn't mean easy," she replied. "This will upset people. It'll make them uncomfortable. It'll make them angry. They're already uncomfortable," Jordan pointed out. "The difference now is they have to face it." The company-wide meeting later that day was packed. Employees from every department filled the large auditorium, their faces a mix of curiosity, apprehension, and quiet resistance. The atmosphere buzzed with unspoken tension, the weight of anticipation hanging heavy in the air. Nina stood at the podium, the audit report resting on the lectern before her. She glanced at the crowd, her gaze sweeping across the faces of those she led. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, the moment she had been preparing for her entire career. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady but deliberate. "What I'm about to share with you is not easy to hear, but it's the truth. And if we're going to move forward as a company, as a community, we need to confront that truth together." She paused, letting her words settle before continuing. "The audit revealed patterns of bias, exclusion, and inequity. These aren't isolated incidents. They're systemic issues that have shaped the culture of this company. And as your leader, I take responsibility for allowing them to persist." A murmur rippled through the crowd. some nodding in agreement while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Nina pressed on. "I know what some of you are thinking," she said, her tone sharper now. "You're thinking, I'm not part of the problem. You're thinking, I treat everyone equally. But let me ask you this. When was the last time you questioned your assumptions? When was the last time you spoke up when you saw someone being dismissed or overlooked? Silence is complicity, and complicity is part of the problem." The questions came fast and pointed during the Q&A session. Some employees expressed support, their voices tinged with relief that these issues were finally being addressed. Others were defensive, questioning the necessity of such a sweeping initiative. One man near the back stood up, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Why does everything have to be about race? Can't we just focus on doing our jobs?" Nina met his gaze without flinching. "Because pretending it's not about race doesn't make the problem go away," she said. "It just makes it easier for people like you to ignore it." The room grew still, her words landing like a stone in a quiet pond. Later that evening, Nina sat alone in her office, the echoes of the day still reverberating in her mind. The meeting had been a turning point not just for the company, but for her. She had stood in the face of resistance, of anger, of fear, and refused to back down. Jordan knocked softly before entering, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "You look tired," he said, setting one on her desk. "I am," she admitted, taking the mug and holding it between her hands. The warmth was soothing, but the weight in her chest remained. "But we made progress today." "Real progress." Jordan nodded, taking a seat across from her. "You know this isn't the end, right? There's still a long way to go." Nina smiled faintly. "There always is." As night fell over the city, Nina gazed out the window at the glittering lights below. The challenges ahead felt vast, but so did the possibilities. She thought of the countless people who would benefit from the changes she was fighting for, not just in her company, but beyond it. This wasn't just about Aurora Aviation. It was about creating a ripple effect, about showing what was possible when you refused to accept the status quo. The stars above seemed impossibly far away, yet Nina felt a quiet certainty as she looked at them. She wasn't just reaching for the sky, she was redefining what it meant to soar.